In the previous episode, Daryl and Laurent successfully reunited with Carol. Anna provided Daryl with the fuel needed for the plane, but Ash was furious after Carol revealed the truth. He disclosed that the plane could only carry 3 people, meaning someone would have to be left behind. In a dense, fog-filled forest, a group of survivors was making their way through. Since the leaders of the 2 major gangs, Lausanne and Janet, were killed by Daryl one after the other, the situation in France has stabilized. Caudron chooses to stay at Fallow's camp. He usually goes out with Fallow to gather supplies. Recently, a few new people joined the base. The curly-haired woman is named Aquila. She came here to find her sister. Fallow and Aquila fled from the same region, so they have many common topics to talk about. However, this mission could be dangerous, so Fallow instructed Aquila to stay behind and watch the horses while he and Caudron went into the castle to scavenge supplies.
Attention au coup de foudre, hein?
Joking aside, the moment they entered the castle, they became highly alert, carefully making their way up the stairs. As they turned a corner, they spotted a zombie sitting in a wheelchair. However, they did not attack but continued walking upstairs. The castle had previously been converted into a mental hospital, so encountering zombies still strapped to hospital beds didn't surprise them much. The 2 began searching for anything useful among the wreckage. After more than a decade since the apocalypse began, most medications were clearly expired, but something was better than nothing, so they decided to take whatever they could find. They planned to search for some medical equipment as well. If they managed to gather those, this trip would be considered a success. Fallow decided to check out a nearby room, while Caudron continued searching further inside. It was a tragic sight. The patients had been strapped to their beds, and even after dying and turning into zombies, they remained unable to break free. Caudron walked up to one of the zombies, staring at it for a moment before yanking the cross necklace from its neck. After all, faith was meaningless to the zombies. Just then, Fallow shouted for Caudron from outside. As if he had discovered something, Caudron grabbed his shotgun and was about to head out.
Et doucement.
At that moment, Sabine appeared. She demanded to know where the plane was. Caudron found it strange both leaders Sabine had followed were now dead, so why was she still causing trouble?
Oh non, elle est pas morte, la cause. Sœur Jacinta va veiller à ce que la prophétie se réalise.
Even Caudron was baffled by her actions. With her skills, Sabine could easily start her own group. Instead, she insisted on finding a leader to follow and was hell-bent on chasing down a child from a false prophecy. One of the soldiers nearby immediately began interrogating Caudron, demanding that he reveal the plane's location. Sabine went further, threatening Caudron by saying, "If you don't tell us, I'll kill Fallow." Caudron hesitated. Was he really going to betray his friend just to survive the situation? Suddenly, the situation turned on its head. Fallow chased after him directly with a shotgun, while Aquila followed behind with a bow and arrow. It was Aquila who arrived just in time to save Caudron and Fallow. Meanwhile, Caudron was wrestling with one of the soldiers. Before Aquila could assist, Caudron found an opening, disarmed the soldier, and swiftly took him out. Fallow, who hadn't managed to catch Sabine, returned just in time to witness the scene. That afternoon, Anna and her subordinates were on their way back to the villa. Ever since helping Daryl and Laurent, Anna often found herself thinking about her mother. Her homeland was far away in Russia, and she wondered if she would ever have the chance to see her mother again. Just then, an ATV appeared directly in front of them. Anna's driver had just applied the brakes when a group of people suddenly appeared nearby, armed and demanding that the people in the car get out. In such a situation, Anna still managed to maintain her elegance, but in the end, she stepped out of the car on her own. It was obvious that this military group had been lying in wait for her. As a result, Anna didn't resist right away. When she saw Jacinta, she wasn't surprised at all.
I want the same thing he wanted.
I didn't help him, why help you?
Jacinta immediately turned to her soldiers and gave a signal, and Anna's driver was promptly shot in the leg. Watching her subordinate being beaten, Anna remained completely calm and composed. She even calmly added a remark.
Ouch.
After a brief back and forth, it was Jacinta who lost her patience first. She demanded that Anna reveal the plane's location or she would kill the woman standing nearby. Yet Anna continued to act indifferent, as if she didn't care in the slightest. Realizing that these tactics weren't working on Anna, Jacinta finally set aside her arrogance and asked what Anna wanted. Anna, being a businesswoman at heart, knew when to stop pushing her luck. she admitted that all she wanted was to go home. "I can help you catch Laurent, but I'll keep the plane and the pilot." Jacinta smiled with satisfaction. With Anna's help, she was sure to succeed in her next move. Meanwhile, at the racetrack, Ash was showing Laurent around the interior of the plane. The two seemed to be getting along well. Daryl was off to the side sharpening his dagger, but it was clear that his mind was elsewhere. Even though he had already decided to stay behind, the thought of saying goodbye left him feeling stifled. Carol approached with her hands behind her back and reassured Daryl not to worry. She told him that Ash knew how to take care of the boy. Daryl trusted Ash's character, but he still felt uneasy about leaving Laurent. Holding the crossbow he had finally recovered, Daryl was deeply moved. In the end, all he could say was a simple thank you. Carol takes the opportunity to say,
Look, I know what you're gonna say. You ain't staying.
Perhaps it was the unspoken understanding between Carol and Daryl. They both knew how far the other would go to protect their family. Carol insisted on staying behind. She said it would allow her to atone for her earlier lies, and she wouldn't have to worry about Daryl putting himself in danger. Ash overheard their conversation.
He's right. He knows how to survive. And you know the plane. You can help me.
Ash, this isn't about that.
It is about whatever can get that kid back to a safe place.
At this point, the most critical issue was ensuring Lauren's safety. By comparison, Carol was still the better choice to accompany them. The decision was made just like that. Just then, there was a sudden noise outside the door, and they immediately took up their weapons and got ready.
Easy.
Jacinta's still alive.
They soon realized that to protect both Laurent and the plane, they would need to take off as soon as possible. 10 minutes later, everyone pushed the plane out of the warehouse. Since the plane hadn't been used in a long time, Ash needed to test the engine. At that moment, a convoy arrived at the outskirts of the racetrack. Jacinta had tracked them here with Anna's help, bringing all her elite soldiers. Her methods were even more ruthless than Lozang's, and she couldn't afford to fail this mission. Under Sabine's command, a small group stayed behind to guard the entrance, while the main force marched grandly toward the inner area. Anna walked alone at the front of the group. As she approached the stairwell, she slowed her pace. Her eyes fell on a poster of the Eiffel Tower on the wall, and she was reminded of her first encounter with Laurent.
It will be beautiful again. Someday. I hope you get to go home soon.
So, which way?
Snapping back to the present, Anna spoke. "From this staircase, we can reach the parking lot. There's a route that leads directly to the runway." Jacinta glanced at the darkened passageway. Suspicious that Anna might pull a trick, she ordered Anna to lead the way. Anna had only heard reports from her subordinates about the situation here, but she didn't fully understand it herself. Nevertheless, she was the first to step down the stairs. Following the dimly lit staircase, they soon arrived at the parking lot. Ahead, a metal gate blocked the path, and at the far end of the lot was the exit. Hearing Jacinta's urging, Anna pushed the iron door open without hesitation and walked in. Under Jacinta's command, the soldiers followed behind her. Anna kept her composure, subtly scanning her surroundings. She quickly located a safe exit and waited for the right moment. Jacinta followed closely, exuding confidence as if victory was already within her grasp. Who would have expected them to launch a surprise attack from here? Suddenly, a noise echoed from up ahead. Everyone tensed and raised their weapons. Moments later, the guttural snarls of zombies erupted from all around. This was exactly the moment Anna had been waiting for. Suddenly, a zombie bit down on Jacinta's arm, and she reflexively fired a shot. Under the cover of her subordinates, Jacinta panicked and retreated. Anna felt her way along the wall, running toward the safety exit, only to find that the door wouldn't budge. Behind her, several zombies were already closing in. For a brief moment, Anna felt despair, but she quickly snapped out of it and turned to run back. Jacinta and her team had already retreated to the entrance. Seeing through Anna's plan, Jacinta deliberately closed the metal gate before Anna could reach it.
Dixon will kill you. No. God is on our side. God gave up on us a long time ago.
As soon as she finished speaking, a zombie bit down on Anna's shoulder, but Anna gritted her teeth and didn't make a sound. Although she felt a tinge of regret for not being able to completely trap the team, she had no regrets about her decision. Jacinta's group had suffered heavy casualties. They had no choice but to abandon the mission and retreat. Meanwhile, Ash was testing the plane's engine to see if it was functioning properly. Elsewhere, Jacinta led her team back to the hall. They were utterly disheartened by their situation. The mission had failed, and Jacinta herself had been bitten by a zombie. Just then, she heard a commotion outside. Jacinta's expression lit up with sudden hope, and she hurriedly led her subordinates toward the source of the noise. Ash's test was quickly completed, but the results weren't promising. The carburetor malfunctioned, forcing Ash to step out of the plane to make repairs. Fallow and Cadron stood on guard nearby when the sound of an engine caught their attention. A moment later, a motorcycle appeared behind them. The enemy had found their location. Fallow and Cadron were ready to engage, but the motorcycle immediately turned around and sped away. Daryl grabbed his weapon and turned to reassure Laurent, saying, "Leave here without worry, I'll find you soon." At that moment, Jacinta's team arrived and launched an attack. Dodging and returning fire, Cadron held his ground, his aim steady even with a single hand on his gun. Luckily, there was cover nearby. Cadron and Fallow took turns firing and successfully eliminated one of the snipers on the stands. Under the group's protection, Laurent was safely escorted onto the plane, with Carol following shortly after. The parting came too suddenly, and Carol and Daryl didn't have time to say goodbye. Watching the plane start up successfully, Daryl turned and ran to the back. He called over Cadron and Fallow to help him push the starting gate toward the runway to block part of the advancing attack. Meanwhile, Jacinta's team was making their way toward the racetrack. Everyone braced for action, prepared for a decisive showdown with Daryl. Before the three of them could push the starting gate far enough, they saw the convoy rushing towards them. Cadron hurled a grenade with all his strength, destroying the lead vehicle equipped with a heavy machine gun. The cars behind it stopped in a hurry, and they took out their weapons and started attacking. Despite Jacinta's superior firepower, Daryl and his team's suppressive attack left them struggling to find an opening. Daryl fought with everything he had, buying as much time as possible for Ash and the others. Thanks to Daryl's relentless cover, the plane made it onto the runway. Those aboard the plane were worried as they watched Daryl and the others struggling to hold their ground. The battle raged on. When Daryl glanced back and saw the plane still stationary, he wondered if something had gone wrong. At the same time, Jacinta spotted the plane parked in the distance, a golden opportunity. She immediately ordered her forces to flank and encircle it. Ash pushed the throttle, and the plane began accelerating steadily down the runway. But a motorcycle suddenly raced toward the plane at full speed. Daryl fired several shots to stop it, but all of them missed. He quickly gave chase. The motorcycle was fast. It soon rushed onto the runway and tried to intercept the plane with full power. Laurent shouted a warning, but there was nothing anyone aboard the plane could do. They could only watch helplessly as the rider opened fire. Daryl arrived just in time, kneeling on one leg to steady his sniper rifle. Ash barely had a moment to celebrate when a mountain buggy sped out and blocked the plane's path. Daryl exhaled deeply, calmed his mind, and aimed for the buggy's driver, but two soldiers on the side suddenly attacked him with precise shots. Daryl took them both down with one bullet each. The plane still wasn't moving fast enough. Ash was desperate, knowing that if they didn't take off now, they were all doomed. At the critical moment, Daryl's sniper rifle ran out of bullets. Ash, gritting his teeth, pushed the throttle to its limit for a final desperate attempt. As Ash's plane was about to collide with the mountain bike, Daryl had to make sure that he hit the target. Suddenly, the plane lifted off smoothly, and everyone finally breathed a sigh of relief. But the co-pilot's seat was empty. Carol was gone. It was Carol who had fired the crucial shot. Daryl exhaled deeply, his emotions too complex to put into words. Carol and Daryl took their weapons and met in the middle. Together, they watched the familiar plane disappear into the sky. The battle on the other side continued, with Fallow and Cadron struggling to hold their ground. However, in the next moment, Jacinta's entire team collectively looked upward, their attacks coming to a complete halt. Jacinta's heart sank to the bottom. The plane had successfully taken off, which meant Laurent had left France. In that instant, all her obsessions and faith crumbled into nothing. A gunshot rang out. Carol and Daryl immediately turned to look back, guessing that Jacinta had taken her own life to atone. This woman had done a lot of evil, and it was quite reasonable for her to choose such an ending. The plane soared over the Parisian skyline just as it had upon arrival, with hopes that Ash and Lawrence's journey would be safe and smooth. The war between religion and the gangs was finally over. Lawrence's departure was likely to bring some stability to the region over time. The remaining group drove away from the racetrack. Arriving at a farmhouse by evening, they decided to rest there for the night and discuss their next destination. Fallow stayed back to close the gates. Only after doing so did he join the others, saying, "2 more people are coming later. We'll leave together in the morning." Fallow took out his luggage and then struck up a conversation with Aquila beside him. He had heard that the situation in post-apocalyptic Britain was somewhat better and invited her to join him on the journey, but Aquila declined. She had just arrived in Paris and hadn't yet found her sister, Jamila, so she wouldn't be leaving anytime soon. At that moment, the gate creaked open, and Daryl instinctively raised his crossbow.
Fallow, maybe your pals could stop pointing those things at us?
Fallow smiled and stepped forward to greet the newcomers. These were the people they were expecting: Fiona and Angus, a couple from England who could guide them on the next leg of their journey. After Fallow's introductions, the two sides exchanged brief pleasantries. Fiona and Angus walked over, carrying their prey. Angus popped open a supply crate and, upon seeing canned goods and bottles of wine, both he and Fiona grinned. These items would be more than enough to get through checkpoints. Angus even pulled out a bottle of red wine, intending to pair it with the game for dinner. 2 hours later, the group gathered around a campfire in the courtyard and shared a simple meal. Naturally, the apocalypse became the main topic of conversation. The couple talked about their fascination with France, marveling at its history and culture. As an outsider himself, Fallow agreed with their sentiment but admitted that life in France wasn't exactly comfortable. Before the apocalypse, Fallow had worked at a hospital. His neighbor, a descendant of nobility, constantly nitpicked and found faults with him. After the neighbor lost his job, he would frequently get drunk and hurl insults at Fallow, telling him to go back to where he came from. But when the apocalypse struck, everything changed. One day, that neighbor knocked on Fallow's door, holding his unconscious 2-year-old daughter and pleading for help. Fortunately, Fallow managed to save the girl just in time, clearing her airway. When she opened her eyes and saw him, she smiled.
And the father?
He took her and left, but I saw gratitude in his eyes.
The apocalypse put an end to racism.
After Angus finished speaking, the atmosphere became awkward in an instant. Fiona quickly patted Angus on the leg, signaling that such behavior was very impolite. Fallow was magnanimous. He admitted that the apocalypse might have brought some kind of change, saying, "Now, there are only 2 kinds of people left: those who are alive and those who are dead." Sensing the mood growing heavy, Aquila suddenly announced that she needed to fetch some firewood. She stood up and headed toward the barn. Fallow called out to her, offering to go along. Inside the barn, Aquila prodded him for the rest of the story. When she learned that Fallow had barely survived that winter, she pulled him close and kissed him. After spending so much time together, Aquila had also fallen in love with Fallow, but they would part ways tomorrow, and she felt an overwhelming sense of reluctance in her heart. Meanwhile, back at the campfire, the others were bidding each other goodnight and heading off to rest. Soon, only Daryl and Cadron were left by the fire. They were once enemies, now teammates, sharing this rare moment of peace together. Cadron broke the silence, apologizing for what had happened with Isabel. He explained that he knew the pain of losing family and had only wanted justice for his brother.
You're kidding, sure?
I didn't kill him. The girl beat me to it.
What girl?
A skinny girl on the road. She was with some old guy who he tricked me into thinking he was blind.
But when the truth was revealed, Cadron felt as though his entire world had collapsed. He had caused so much harm, lost so much, and, in the end, had been seeking revenge against the wrong person. While Daryl hadn't given him all the details, Cadron believed that Daryl's account was the true version of events. Looking at the cross in his hands, Cadron suddenly felt grateful that he had held onto a shred of faith that had stopped him from causing even greater harm. With their misunderstanding resolved, Daryl went to find Carol. He noticed that his old friend seemed troubled and wanted to check on her. Daryl, as always, comforted Carol, saying that those visions were just illusions. Whether it was the people who were lost or the events of the past, none of it was her fault.
None of that's your fault. We keep going. All right? That's what we do.
At the critical moment when the plane was leaving, Carol chose to stay behind with Daryl. Together, they decided to find another way home, planning to head to Britain and try their luck. As for why they chose Britain, here's a bit of backstory. In the final episode of the previous season, Losung had mentioned that fishing boats in Britain could ferry people to Canada. Daryl gave up on that opportunity then, but this time, Fallow went out of his way to find guides for the journey. The couple from England, Fiona and Angus, knew the route and could lead them through the Channel Tunnel. Fallow walked at the back of the group. Just the night before, he and Aquila had confessed their feelings for each other. But now, they were still facing the reality of parting ways. Aquila was staying behind to search for her sister, Jamila, while Fallow planned to go to Britain to start a new life. Though the future was uncertain, having a goal to work toward was better than wandering aimlessly in the apocalypse. As he walked, Fallow suddenly figured everything out.
Bon courage, mes amis. I know you will get where you are going.
Fallow turned to look back at Aquila, who was still standing in place, watching him leave. It seemed she was also waiting for him to make up his mind. Turning back to Daryl and the others, Fallow announced, "I have a reason to stay now." Seeing Fallow find his sense of purpose, everyone smiled and offered their blessings. After fighting side by side for a year, Fallow and Daryl had built a deep bond, but as the saying goes, all good things must come to an end. Fallow needed to pursue his own path. As they approached the entrance to the tunnel, Daryl turned back one last time to see Fallow and Aquila standing together in the distance. Finally reassured, he caught up with the group and entered the dark, cavernous Channel Tunnel, but they had barely gone 200 meters when the shrill cries of bats echoed above them. Fortunately, the creatures were not aggressive, so the group quickly let down their guard. They continued for another 5 kilometers when cracks began to appear in the tunnel ceiling. Seawater dripped steadily through the fissures, making the environment increasingly tense and nerve-wracking. Noticing their unease, Angus tried to reassure them, explaining that every 500 meters, there was a yellow safety door that led to a secondary escape tunnel.
Only 91 to go.
No, hold up.
That must be a checkpoint.
English? Why so close to France?
To keep out the French.
Hey, relax, man.
Hearing Angus's tone grow snide again, Cadron immediately issued a warning to him. Fiona quickly stepped in to smooth things over, saying that she would go to the checkpoint and shout, so that the people inside would be more accommodating. With that, the earlier friction came to an end, and the group followed Fiona forward.
We're British. Please don't shoot. We come bearing gifts. Angus, get it. Okay, thanks.
They called out a few times but received no response, which left them feeling uneasy. A moment later, they discovered that the soldiers stationed on the high platforms were already dead. Clearly, a battle had taken place here before. Worried that the barricade might harbor further dangers, Daryl knocked on the warning plate to test for any sounds from within. When none came, he signaled the group to get ready and began removing the chains securing the barricade. In such a dark and confined environment, even without zombies, they had to remain on guard for ambushes. Once inside, they discovered numerous tents and electrical facilities. It was evident this had once been a military camp, now abandoned. As the lights flickered on, the bodies strewn across the ground became visible. Daryl examined the dead soldiers carefully. They were armed with guns but had knife wounds through their skulls, suggesting they had been killed off guard. This also implied the soldiers had died in a mutual slaughter. Pulling back the tarp on one of the tents, Daryl found 2 gas masks beneath it. He immediately realized the danger. These soldiers had been prepared but still fell victim to something. Clearly, this place was fraught with danger. Daryl quickly called his teammates to leave, but as he pushed open the next barricade, the sight before them stunned everyone. The tunnel ahead shimmered with fluorescent light, appearing both eerie and beautiful. They couldn't help but feel curious about what these things might be.
Some animals and plants generate their own light.
Like fireflies.
Yeah.
Just then, a fluorescent zombie made a noise. Judging by its uniform, it had once been a soldier, but the environment had mutated it. Daryl quickly gathered his companions, urging them to stay close. Taking the lead, he guided them swiftly through the tunnel, reassuring them that as long as they were cautious, the zombies wouldn't be easily alerted. But they underestimated the effect of the glowing dust in the air. After only a few steps, Carol began to feel dizzy, her vision growing blurred. She thought she was the only one experiencing symptoms. However, in the next moment, Angus collapsed to the ground. Fiona quickly rushed to pull her husband up, Unfortunately, their actions alerted the surrounding zombies. Daryl quickly turned around, spotting a zombie rising with a roar. He prepared to retreat the way they had come, but trouble had already found Angus and Fiona. The fight broke out unexpectedly, and the group swiftly adjusted, engaging the zombies in battle. Daryl's crossbow was as reliable as ever, but more zombies appeared in the distance. Seeing that his teammates are still fighting behind him, he can only try his best to kill as many zombies as possible. Switching to his flail, Daryl moved to intercept the next wave. But then, his vision began to blur, and the zombies before him twisted and distorted. For a moment, he couldn't tell if what he was seeing was real or just a hallucination. Testing reality was simple enough, though. Meanwhile, Carol fought with her characteristic calm, dispatching zombies without hesitation, but as she drew her knife to strike, she froze in place. She saw Sophia, turned into a zombie, walking toward her just as she had so many times before. And just like all those times, Carol found herself unable to act, holding her knife with trembling hands. Carol hesitated, her eyes darting around in search of her daughter. When she saw Sophia disappear through the safety door, Carol instinctively followed. It wasn't just Carol, the other teammates were also succumbing to the hallucinations. Kadron looked down at the weapon in his hand, only to see it transform into the long blade that had killed his brother. In the distance, the zombie transformed into the image of his brother, grabbing Kadron by the collar and preparing to bite him. Daryl, having just killed the last zombie in his vicinity, glanced over and saw Kadron trapped in his delusion. Daryl acted swiftly, swinging his flail to knock the zombie down and quickly finishing it off with his dagger. Caught off guard, Daryl was struck by Kadron, who then took a step back and picked up a handgun from the ground. It was clear Kadron had murder in his eyes. Before Kadron could react, Daryl immediately rushed forward and locked his arm around Kodron's neck, but Kodron's strength was immense, and he managed to brace himself and stand upright. Daryl tried to choke Kadron into unconsciousness, but he couldn't overpower him. Kadron overpowered him, slamming Daryl to the ground and quickly stabbing him with a bayonet. Suddenly, Kodron's gaze snapped upward. Kadron suddenly looked up and saw his brother's figure appear in the distance. He immediately abandoned his attack, shouting his brother's name as he ran after it. Daryl narrowly survived the attack. Gasping for air, he knew he couldn't afford to be controlled by hallucinations. Finding a gas mask was his only option. Struggling to his feet, he staggered toward the nearest tent. Elsewhere, Carol had passed through the safety door and was wandering the empty passage, searching for her daughter. She refused to believe it was a hallucination and desperately wanted to see Sophia again, even if only for a moment. But as she walked, Sophia was suddenly swallowed by a swarm of dark shadows. Carol frantically searched, only to see a mass of zombies. The next moment, she saw herself among them, her zombie self, snarling with a hideous expression. The sight was too horrifying. Carol shook her head, trying to dispel the illusion, and finally snapped back to reality. Realizing the danger ahead, Carol placed her flashlight on the ground and drew her knife, ready to fight. Looking at herself turned into a zombie, Carol really couldn't bring herself to do it. Her inner torment had always been rooted in her daughter's tragic fate. But at its core, Carol's struggle was with herself. She had never forgiven herself, repeatedly revisiting the image of Sophia as a zombie in the barn. In truth, the person who had turned into a walking corpse had long since shifted from being Sophia to being Carol herself. After what felt like an eternity, Carol finally lowered her knife. It was a symbolic gesture of self-forgiveness. For a mother, time doesn't erase grief, but it can help her find balance. Carol lifted her head slowly and began to cry, the tears flowing freely. She saw Sophia standing in the distance, her familiar, sweet smile lighting up her face.
It's been so long. Can I come with you?
Sophia didn't respond. She simply withdrew her hand slowly, silently expressing her refusal. Then she turned and walked toward the unknown depths of the tunnel. Carol smiled through her tears, watching her daughter disappear into the darkness. It felt like a burden she had carried for so long had finally been lifted. For the first time, Carol felt at peace. Carol reclaimed her earliest memories, and perhaps from now on, she would no longer be tormented by that nightmare. Meanwhile, Daryl stumbled into the tent and successfully found the 2 gas masks. Suddenly, Angus dropped his weapon, picked up one of the masks, and handed it to his wife. The Angus couple had disappeared shortly after the fight began. It turned out they had been hiding here all along. Daryl was already wounded from a knife attack, and after inhaling excessive dust and being ambushed, his consciousness began to blur. In that moment, teetering on the brink of death, a figure with a long rifle slung over their back appeared in his line of sight. The silhouette felt strangely familiar to Daryl. It was Isabel, just as she had appeared when he first met her, walking slowly toward him.
That there's nothing left inside you. You think it's over. But you won't die here.
For a fleeting moment, Daryl considered giving up, surrendering to the illusion and losing himself in it. But Isabel spoke to him with earnest encouragement. She reached for the dog tags around his neck, a token reserved for soldiers. Daryl turned his head to see a figure of a soldier standing nearby. The tags didn't belong to him but to William Dixon, Daryl's grandfather, who had died in France during World War II. At this moment, William Dixon's appearance served only to remind his descendants not to bow to adversity but to strive to keep living. Daryl's awareness snapped back. Instinctively, he grabbed a shovel and swung it at the man across from him with all his might. Again and again, Fiona screamed in horror, rushing at Daryl in a frenzy. He easily overpowered her, throwing her to the ground and gripping her throat tightly. Daryl held the reclaimed gas mask, gasping for air. It was a long while before he slowly regained his senses. Daryl suddenly realized that Isabel was still watching him from a short distance away.
Bon courage, Monsieur Dixon.
Isabel was about to leave. It wasn't the ending Daryl had hoped for, but reality was often cruel. Like a firefly fading into the night, Isabel disappeared, fulfilling their final promise to each other. 5 minutes later, Carol returned the same way she had come. With her strong willpower, she overcame the hallucinations and successfully reunited with Daryl. Seeing the 2 bodies on the ground, Carol didn't need an explanation to understand what had happened. But where was Cadron? Not wanting to worry Carol, Daryl left out the details of the brutal fight, simply saying that Cadron had been affected by the hallucinations and run off. Daryl and Carol exchanged a knowing glance, immediately understanding each other's thoughts.
Let's go home.
The journey ahead was once again left to just Daryl and Carol. The glowing tunnel stretched over 40 kilometers, and they had no idea what dangers might lie ahead or what awaited them on the other side in Britain. All we can do is wait for the next season to unfold.
Try sometimes.